Hello, I'm Robert Moynihan. I'm an American journalist. I've been covering the Vatican for 30 years, the pontificate of John Paul II, his contest with the Soviet Union, his battle over the culture, the election of Pope Benedict, his pontificate, and then the election of Pope Francis, and these last 8 years. I have many different contacts and friends in the church, and among them was Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano. I came to know him many years ago, but in the past 3 years, this archbishop, an Italian archbishop who is now 80 years old, has become perhaps the single most controversial figure in the Roman Catholic Church. For that reason, I find it imperative to understand how this high-ranking church official could have become such a profound critic, not only of corruption in the church, but also of doctrinal confusion, the entire pontificate of Pope Francis, and finally, in recent months, a criticism also of the secular developments, the virus, the vaccines, the global plan for a single global community, and he has reached beyond his traditional area of expertise to become one of the voices in the world today who is most compelling, most controversial, and most interesting on understanding where we are right now in 2021 after the year and a half of the virus and after many decades of modernity have changed not only the Catholic Church, but also the Protestant churches, also Judaism, also Islam. So we have a wide-ranging interview now with this very controversial, very interesting Italian Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano. Question number 1. Archbishop Vigano, very nice to see you again, and very pleased that you are willing to answer our questions. The great question has 2 parts. It's the world and it's the church. We're looking at a global pandemic and a global move towards a new world order. And we're also looking at the church in confusion, in division, in concern about how it reacts to this new world order, whether it's breaking with its tradition or holding fast to its tradition. And you've got comments to make and insights on both of these questions, the present pandemic and the present crisis in the Roman Catholic Church. So what do you think about the current pandemic and about the current confusion and crisis in the Catholic Church under the leadership of Pope Francis?
It now seems clear to me that we are facing a siege on both the social and religious front. The so-called emergency pandemic has been utilized as a false pretext to impose the vaccination and the Green Pass in many nations of the world in a simultaneous and coordinated way. At the same time, on the other front, not only do the ecclesiastical authorities not condemn in the least the abuse of power by those who govern public affairs, but they support them in this wicked plan and go so far as to condemn those who do not accept being subjected to inoculation with an experimental gene serum with unknown side effects that does not impart any immunity from the virus, to say nothing of the moral implications related to the presence of genetic material derived from aborted fetuses, which for a Catholic is itself a more than sufficient reason to refuse the vaccine. We are at war. A war that is not openly declared.
Do you hear this?
That is not fought with conventional weapons, but a war all the same, in which there are aggressors and aggressees, executioners and victims, kangaroo courts and prisoners. A war in which violence is used in ostensibly legal forms in order to violate the rights of citizens as well as believers. It is an epochal war that is a prelude to the end times and the great apostasy spoken of in sacred scripture.
Do you hear this?
Archbishop, you've spoken in very stark terms about an undeclared war, and you've spoken about grave dangers, but you've emphasized that you see a type of coordination between the globalists, as we may call them, the architects of this New World Order, and the Catholic Church, with Pope Francis. How can we explain what seems to be a new alliance?
This is a secret of the used car market, but many people still don't know it. This groundbreaking car spray will make your car look brand new.
The alliance that you mentioned is not between state and church, but between the deep state and the deep church, that is, the degenerated components present within each. The state has at its hands the bonum commune with respect to both the natural law as well as the divine and positive law. The Church has as her hand the salus animarum with respect to the unchanging teaching of Christ. It is obvious that rulers are not pursuing the common good when they expose a population to experimentation without scientific basis, even in the face of evidence of the vaccine's ineffectiveness and the damage it causes to those who have received it. And it is equally obvious that the ecclesiastical hierarchy, insofar as it lends itself to supporting this massacre plan on the global level, is an accomplice to a crime against humanity, and even more, to a very grave sin against God. The Bergoglian Synodrine is clearly integral to the plan of the Great Reset.
Bergoglian is Pope Francis.
On one hand, because it is pursuing ends that have nothing to do with the purpose of the Catholic Church. And in the other, because it's hoped that its complicity can bring it some sort of political and economic advantage in view of the new order. This criminal complicity is there for all to see, and is further proven by Bergoglio's obsessive vaccination campaign, which by means of moral blackmail want to impose inoculation with an experimental genetic serum on everybody. In recent days, he has gone as far as to involve cardinals and bishops from both North and South America in this shameful propaganda. including Archbishop Gomez of Los Angeles, the president of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. They too bear responsibility for a grave crime against humanity, such as scandalous subservience of prelates to the infernal globalistic agenda has been surpassed only by the recent heretical rants of Bergoglio himself.
You are telling us that the Church has made a shameful alliance with people whose goals are not the same as traditional Christian goals. What price, in your view, is the Church paying for making this choice? Why is it making this choice?
The enslavement of the Holy See and all its peripheral entities to the pandemic narration is the pretium sanguinis of a scandalous betrayal. We see the ecclesiastical hierarchy, with some exception, completely integral to the globalistic plan of the elite, and not only on the health issue, but also and above all on what concerns the Great Reset and the entire ideological structure on which it is based. In order to do this, the hierarchy has said to apostatize the doctrine, deny Christ, dishonor his church. The Martulian ecologism, Hellenistic ecumenism, that is a prelude to the constitution of the universal religion. The Fourth Revolution, theorized by Klaus Schwab and the family of international finance, find in Bergoglio not a neutral spectator, which would itself already be an unheard of thing, but actually a zealous cooperator who abuses his own moral authority in order to support a destra outside the church the project of the dissolution of traditional society, while ad intra within the church he pursues the project of the demolition of the church in order to replace her with a philanthropic organization of Masonic inspiration. And it is scandalous, as well as a source of great sorrow, to see that in the face of this ruthless and cruel massacre, the majority of bishops are silent, or rather, they align themselves obediently out of fear, self-interest, or ideological blindness. On the other hand, today's hierarchy comes from the conciliar school. It has been formed and chosen in view of this evolution. In addition to the episcopate, all of the religious order, university and Catholic institutions have been occupied since the Council by fifth columns that have formed generation of clergy, politicians, intellectual, entrepreneurs, bankers, professors, and journalists, indoctrinating them into progressive ideology. And just as the left has done in the political and cultural sphere, so within the church, the innovators have ostracized any voice of dissent, driven out those who are not aligned, and expelled those who resist. The persecution we are witnessing today is no different from that of decades past, but now it has been extended to the masses, while previously it focuses on individuals and the ruling class. This applies to both, to civil and ecclesiastical world, confirming the pactum sceleri, the criminal conspiracy between the deep state and the deep church. It seems to me that in this conspiracy the role of the Jesuit has been decisive. It is no coincidence that for the first time in history, a religious of the Society of Jesus is seated on the throne of Peter, in violation of the rule established by Saint Ignatius of Loyola.
Question number 4. In your opinion, how does the recent papal decree, Traditionis Custodes, the guardians of tradition, fit into the context of what is happening on the global level? In other words, Pope Francis on the 16th of July issued a startling, unexpected decree canceling the 1,000-year-old liturgy of the Church, saying we must now have only one liturgy, the one that was written and introduced in the 1960s. Many Catholics were heartbroken because they have a deep connection with the old liturgy. You believe that there's a connection between this decision of Pope Francis and the preparation of the Church to ally itself to this new global order in the Great Reset. Can you explain how the prayers in the Church are related to the Great Reset?
Sorry about this. I wanted this to have something to do with the FBI and Latin speaking Catholics.
The decision to abolish the traditional liturgy, which was restored to the Church by Benedict XVI in 2007, is not an isolated incident and must be contextualized in a broader perspective. Bergoglio acts on two fronts: an ideological one, with which he wants to prevent any expression of dissent with respect to the failure of the new conciliar path, and also a spiritual one, aimed at preventing the propagation of the objective good of the holy sacrifice of the Mass, in order to favor those who see in that Mass a terrible obstacle to the establishment of the new order, Novus Ordo Seculorum, that is the reign of the Antichrist. It is not possible to believe that Bergoglio does not clearly understand the consequences deriving from his decision, or that he doesn't realize that depriving the Church of the Apostolic Mass is an assist to the enemies of Christ and to the demon himself. It is as if a commander of a division in the height of battle would order his soldier to fight against tanks using slingshots, laying down the most effective weapons that would enable victory over the adversary. I am convinced that the faithful, numerous priests and some bishops, are beginning to understand that the question of the traditional Mass is not merely a simple difference of opinion on liturgical matters. And for this reason, they wonder how it can be possible
Latin Catholics
that Bergoglio shows so much fury against a sacrosanct rite that is over 1,000 years old, unless he sees in it a threat to the realization of the globalist plan that he supports. By the grace of God, the faith of the Church is not in the end of the Argentine, over whose remains the Vatican vultures has already hovering.
Archbishop Vigano, you are telling us that the decision to change the liturgy and to abolish the old liturgy does have something to do with this general crisis and the New World Order. What should be the reaction of people in the Church to what is happening, as the Church seems increasingly to be accommodating itself to a plan organized by people outside of the Church?
Well, we find ourselves trapped in an impasse, a dead end, from which we cannot escape as long as we do not recognize it for what it is. If we think that the present crisis can be solved by addressing ourselves to the civil or religious authority,
listen to this,
as if we were in condition of relative normality, we continue to not understand that the responsibility for this crisis lays precisely in a betrayal carried out by those who hold authority.
Event 201.
We cannot ask for justice for a wrong we have suffered if the judge who ought to condemn those who infringe on our rights is their accomplice.
Listen to that.
We cannot turn to a politician expecting them to revoke the violation of our fundamental freedoms if they are the very ones voting for those violations in Parliament.
And Congress have been voting
because
for
they
these
obey
bills.
those who pay them or blackmail them. And we cannot ask the bishops, and even less the Holy See, to protect the rights of the faithful when bishops and the Vatican itself consider our request as a threat to the power they hold and to the bankrupt ideology they defend.
You have spoken of feeling that we are at an impasse, a dead end, both in the Church and in the world. You've described a type of alliance between the deep Church and the deep state, which you feel is not in keeping with traditional Christian teaching or with traditional desire for freedom of the free peoples of the democratic West. But if you are preaching this dead end or impasse, what are you suggesting to people? Are you suggesting some type of disobedience or some type of rebellion?
Sorry.
Big Talk.
Catholics are naturally oriented towards order, to respect for authority and the hierarchy. Because this order and authority emanate from the wisdom of God and are necessary for the government of both public affairs as well as the Church. But precisely because the authority of man comes from God, Catholics, like all citizens in general, cannot accept the usurpation of authority by those who set goals opposed to the very reason for which that authority is constituted. The Lord has placed at the head of the Church the successor of the Prince of the Apostles, designating him as his vicar, so that he may pasture the sheep that he has entrusted to him, not so that he may scatter them. Otherwise, he would have chosen Judas and not Simon Peter. Similarly, the authority of temporal rulers finds its legitimization in good government, not in making citizens into slaves or forcing them to do evil, preventing them from pursuing the proximate end of an honest life and the final end of eternal salvation. If authority fails in its duties, and if it betrays and subverts them, it is no longer entitled to demand the obedience of its subjects. Obedience, which is a virtuous link to justice, does not consist in an acritical submission to power, because in doing so, it degenerates into servility and complicity with those who do evil. No one can impose obedience to intrinsically evil order or recognize authority in those who abuse it to indulge evil. Thus, those who resist an illegitimate order apparently disobey the one who gives it, but they obey God, whose power is however exercised by the vicarious authority against his purpose, that is against God himself.
Your Excellency, you've spoken of the distinction between legitimate authority and illegitimate authority, between legitimate commands that we should obey and illegitimate commands that we should not obey and resist. But how can we distinguish between them? Isn't it true that St. Paul, in his letter to the Romans, spoke very clearly about the necessity for Christians to obey the constituted authorities? What do you say?
St. Paul was a Roman citizen, and as such, he had before him the example of the power regulated by laws that later formed the basis for the law of Western nations, and which were also adopted by the Church.